I'm Scott Schwartzberg from the Boynton Lodge Esoteric Research Group.
I'm Nicholas Harvey from the Boynton Lodge Esoteric Research Group, and today we have with us Worshipful Martin Faulks, author of A Mosaic Palace and the Emerald Tablet. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm an English Freemason, as you can hear from my accent. I joined in my mid-20s. The fascination for me in life has always been about the potential that we all have and the mind sciences from different traditions and how these can be applied to live the best life we can. So, as you can imagine, I'd naturally be drawn towards Freemasonry and towards the art of memory as well.
And how would you describe how Freemasonry works with the art of memory?
Well, I actually would say that Freemasonry is a school of the art of memory. So, and the very first reference to what we would now see as Masonic ritual or ceremonies actually does use that term, the art of memory. And it's important for anyone who watches this to know that this particular phrase doesn't just refer to being able to recall something, it's a particular specific practice whereby you would imagine a building and you would practice walking around that building, this memory palace, stopping at different places and using those different locations as a filing system to remember things. So Freemasonry itself is very much a memory art, using this modus operandi.
I can understand that. And you were talking, I noticed that there are three main influences or types of art of memory. Hoping you could expound on that a little
yes.
bit.
So, as you can imagine, there are many schools of memory. But the first one that ever appeared is what we would now call the classical art. So, when the ancient Greek Empire was at its peak, there was a practice used for speech making, which involved the creation of memory palaces. And this was really used by anyone who needed to have a lot of information available. People like travelling poets, politicians, solicitors, that kind of person who has speaking as part of their disciplines. So the classical arts was really focused on being able to give beautiful speeches flawlessly. And what they would do is they'd practice putting their different subjects and the things they had to remember in their memory palace, which would normally be their house or a public place they knew very well, and using this so that they could be as eloquent and as convincing and as impressive as they can in their speeches. This classical art, we've got some records of those, but they're normally Roman, and they've given us all the principles of how to make a memory palace and how to use it, which have been used ever since and in the different schools.
Okay.
When Rome fell, that memory arts carried on, but it took on a slightly different feel. So yes, it was still used for making speeches, particularly for spreading the gospel, but an idea that was but a seed before in the classical arts, an idea that what you remember becomes who you are, became the focus. So memory was more about making sure that your mind was full of virtuous images and moral lessons. that you would plant in yourself like a seed that would grow. So that's where the Christian art starts to begin, and we have memory palaces at all biblical locations, but they're also very creative. They have angels, and each one of the feathers of the angel's wings are a lesson that would lead to you being a better person. Or they have beautiful images of Noah's Ark with different lessons that you would associate.
With each animal? Or?
Yes, that kind of thing. Actually, in the medieval times, there was also a practice associated with memory, which wasn't so overtly Christian, but did have that influence. They had texts called bestiaries, and bestiaries would be if you were a lady or of high standing who could afford a book, and in the mid to late medieval time, you may be able to get a book which had pictures of beautiful exotic animals, some real, some not, and so you could have a leopard and a phoenix and a dragon and a unicorn and an elephant.
Which one of these don't exist?
Those are all seem real.
Certainly here in Florida. So this book, each animal would have a moral lesson that you would press firmly within yourself when you used it for a form of contemplation and meditation, but would also give you a filing system to remember things, even mundane things. So if you had to remember the list of guests coming to a party, you'd associate each one of them with one of the animals. Maybe they're coming riding them, or so. Yes, it was very natural for Noah's Ark to be used in the same way in this memory. And then finally, if we start to move into the time of the Renaissance, we see a movement towards a more mystical form of memory practice, or more magical form. Now let me be clear, within Christianity, memory had already become a form of meditation. They even use the term meditatio, and it had taken on a sense of reverence and a spiritual focus within those who were that way inclined. But with the Hermetic writings becoming more well known, the memory arts took on a whole new goal. The goal being that you could, if you memorized the right things in the right way, it would allow your mind to use them in a superior way. So if you put, for example, all the principles of truth, all the syllogisms of truth into a memory temple, you would be able to start seeing the world in a more clear, enlightened way. If you memorized all the muses and lessons of aesthetics, you would suddenly become amazingly talented at art. So it was the idea that you could take on a talent, that you could upgrade the software of the mind by remembering the right things.
Simply by remembering, not by doing.
Yes, so you know how a big experience can lead you to learn quickly?
Yes.
It was something like that. So a oneness with an idea could lead to something more in your potential. So if we think about this now, if we think about people we know who are very talented in one area, they felt that that was in you, that you had the potential, and that the way you learnt something made a difference. So if you learnt things in a confused, all over the place order, your mind found a ways to find this information, but it had to search. If you put it in the right enlightened order, it was easy access. So you could be as observant as Sherlock Holmes, or as convincing as the most eloquent person you could think of. You could have mathematical ability by memorizing mathematical laws. You gave your mind the tools that it needed to suss everything else out. You planted the seeds right. For their memory palaces, they used classical figures. They used things like statues of the gods, or they liked theatres with a nice sort of beautiful curve to them. And it took on an entirely different form, a focus on talent and ability above virtue, but in addition to virtue.
Okay, that's interesting. You were talking about the Christian art of memory, and you mentioned emblem books, and I wasn't sure what that was.
Okay, so anyone who's watching this who is interested in Freemasonry, they're probably aware of tracing boards. And tracing boards are a remnant of a beautiful practice. So with the printing press came the opportunity to be able to produce books, and one of the type of books they used to produce were emblem books. Now, this is a hobby, but it's also a pursuit where you'd have a book and you'd be able to turn the page, and on there was normally a very complicated picture with lots of hidden symbols and lots of connections, and you had to try to decode it. Sometimes it had a description, sometimes it didn't. And this was used as a form of meditation, and once again described for meditation. And sometimes it was for the fun of working things out. Sometimes it had a goal. So there would be emblem books which would be deliberately calming meditations to find inner peace. And eventually you'd move beyond the emblem. It would just be in your imagination. So they'd have a set route where every symbol had a meaning and a lot of detail. So you know how in meditation practices we modernly see, perhaps people are familiar with these from yoga or Buddhism, when the focus is on your breath, and practicing just keeping your mind on your breath is how you get to that kind of level of pure focus. With the memory arts, because you're trying to recall a very detailed level of information, your focus is absolutely pure. You can't deviate, you can't have a distraction, or you lose that chain of thought. So that was how they achieved their meditative oneness with equality, by that level of detail.
So applying that to Masonry, you said we have the tracing boards.
Yes.
And the lectures after the degrees in America
Yeah.
heavily revolve on that. And I look at it and
Yeah.
I don't know which way to start, which way to go next. And then you see people and they're just rattling it off. They must have learned some memory tricks.
Yeah, so let's be absolutely clear. That tracing board is a memory palace. Even the classical manuals say you can use a picture as a memory palace. So the first step with your emblem book, and let me be direct, there were Rosicrucian and Hermetic memory emblem books. There were Christian emblem books, but there were also ones which were just for your own betterment. They were kind of universal. The first step with your tracing board or your emblem is to memorize the picture. So in the old books, they say, learn to paint this in your mind. Now, most of us, our imagination isn't quite up to the standards they had then. We have so many things which do it for us. So you've got to learn to be able to imagine that tracing board or that emblem as if it's a painting before you. And then you have got certain sections of text that describe the symbols. So the process is that you connect with that symbol, so that stands out to you, and then you recite word for word that particular lesson. And the idea is that you achieve a sense of oneness with it as you do so. And you take yourself on the journey through that picture. And this is designed to bring an inner transformation to you. This is a a very focused form of activity, and what was useful with it, particularly in the Christian art of memory, is that it could be undertaken by someone who is illiterate. They could teach you to do this with a picture in a church or stained glass window. Now, what may be a little bit, what we can gain from this as Freemasons, of course, is now we know that's how these emblems were originally practiced. We could, if we wanted to restore that beautiful discipline, we could bring that back. So instead of just remembering the words of that tracing board while looking at it and pointing at it, now we know that the stages are: learn to remember the picture, learn to remember the words while focusing on the individual symbols, and the third stage, be at one with those lessons and press them firmly in your hearts so they are with you throughout your life. That was what the purpose in these tracing boards, these floor cloths were. I think in America you also had magic lanterns that did the kind of same thing. So that was exactly what they were doing, and to a Freemason in these early years, they wouldn't see it as any different. They knew about emblem books, they saw it in Christianity, they saw it in other traditions. So I think this is a beautiful and exciting thing.
It's definitely a highlight when I hear somebody deliver a lecture at the level it's supposed to be.
Well, let us also, if we're thinking about restoring practice to how it was done, if we are accepting the premise that Freemasonry evolved from a memory art, and that this memory art perhaps was put as part of the stonemasons guilds in Scotland during a time where in Christianity they felt memory was a very good way to make sure you're going to be a good person, then we can look at what did they used to do then with other memory arts at the time that could tell us a little bit about how the Freemasons, or rather the stonemasons at the time, would do it. And that's quite exciting. So first of all, we've got to remember they didn't actually have lodge rooms like this beautiful lodge room here. If you were an original stonemason, you would be imagining that you were in King Solomon's temple, or imagining you were in these places. And your practice would be in your imagination. So if we want to practice in an authentic way and connect with how it's probable this was done in those days, your first step is to, a bit like with the picture, first memorize the lodge room, so you can go with it, go to it in your imagination as if it's real, and then start to memorize the words, and then connect with those symbols so they become part of your normal functioning consciousness. I think that's a wonderful way.
While I was reading the book, you were talking about in the ancient practices where they would meet in a tavern and draw the lodge layout in chalk, and the new initiate would then be told to mop it up.
Yes.
But then it would be his turn to redraw it.
Yes.
So how quickly could somebody memorize
Well,
what they were using?
It's wonderful you should mention this. If we look at sources outside Freemasonry, there are actual sources on the memory arts which have similar methods to those recorded of those early Masons. So there are memory manuals within Christianity that say, it's Noah's Ark. This is a practice for a priest, a monk, or a very dedicated Christian, where you're going to make a memory palace of Noah's Ark. And it says quite clearly, you are to build yourself as a master mason would build a church. You are to make yourself a worthy temple for these higher virtues. If you're not very good at painting with your mind to begin with, so visualization, and your memory isn't very clear, visualization, you may want to draw the outline on the floor in chalk in the way that a master draftsman does. This is a good practice with others when forming the memory temple. So we find that this practice isn't just in Masonry, this is what actual other memory practitioners were doing. So, if we want to restore that, it's quite exciting to think that now we don't need to draw them in chalk, but maybe we should go back to drawing them in our mind.
Yeah, I don't think enough attention is focused on that.
Yeah.
It's presented only during the end of a degree, and then you never hear from it again until the next degree.
Well, it would be interesting to hear your opinions on this. In a society where memory is no longer required as much, and we think back to these earlier days where, as you say, someone can see a layout drawn once and then can draw it again from then onwards because they've had to learn to do that. Freemasonry is an authentic lineage of this method of improving the mind, whereby we use locational memory. So we are standing out as the protectors of this ancient wisdom, this ancient art, in a time where memory means how much you have on your phone or on your disk, not how much you've got here. I think there's a lot of value as a form of training. Many people are seeking methods to improve themselves, to gain inner tranquility, to bring their mind into a better focus, to make sure that they live the best lives they can. Our Masonic practice offers a method to improve their awareness, improve their memory, and to keep their mind fresh, and to move against this tide of having everything done for you
So,
in society, so that you don't become, your intellect isn't weakened by having too much assistance.
you're talking about basically internal alchemy, where you can transform yourself, but if you don't put in the work, nothing will happen.
Absolutely, and let us imagine a freestone mason shaping a stone. Let's imagine a very skilled craftsman doing that, and imagine that particular state of mind, that skillful, fully aware, fully focused state of mind. When chiseling stone, you do have to be quite brave as well. You can't be too tentative either.
Right.
You've got to hit it. This is the state of mind that the memory art seeks to bring around. And I think that alchemy can be a transformation. So you can raise your consciousness, not just in lodge practice, but in life, to have that awareness, have that purpose. I think that is the alchemy that our rituals offer.
Do you have anything to ask?
Yeah,
Brother Harvey?
I'm curious how we went from the Christian art of memory to the Hermetic art of memory.
So yes, so let us be clear that the most of the people who started to practice memory in a Hermetic way had already been trained in a Christian art of memory. When they saw the Hermetic texts, they interpreted the memory practice as being part of this tradition. Hermes was a messenger, and messengers all practice memory. There are sections of the Corpus Hermeticum where it mentions that Hermes, by his memory of these higher things, achieve enlightenment. But they also saw some interesting things that connected with what they already knew. So Christian practitioners of the art of memory used to use images of virtuous people or angels or saints in their practice. Within the Hermetic texts, they saw practices involving statues where in ancient Egypt, and they connected these two, but the statues would be in them. They saw ascent through higher levels, through the planets in the Hermetic text, and they connected that with the ascent through the levels of heaven in some of the Christian memory practices. So they didn't see them as separate. So some people started to develop or restore the Hermetic art of memory from the works that they had. And this most certainly had an influence in at the time on how we viewed things. And I think we do see both goals within Freemasonry. We're most certainly focused on virtue more than anything else, and our symbolism is all very biblical and or lessons like that. But the idea of learning, being able to open up a freedom of the mind and a deeper, a better way of being is in there with the liberal arts and the sciences. I think it's very influenced us.
Wow, so that was super interesting. And kind of along those same lines, I noticed that when you began your talk today, you had all of our officers, their names memorized with their stations. And you have not met them before. I think you were just looking at a trestle board or a summons. How did you do that?
Yes, so this is a wonderful way to start any Masonic talk, is to show you've memorized the names of the officers. And actually, it's remarkably easy to do because the actual Masonic Lodge is a memory palace. So you've got set locations, you've got the key to be able to put the information in that location. So this is quite fun to cover because it also gives tips for anyone who's watching us on how you can create a memory image and in particular use it to remember someone's name. So the most important thing is to remember that exciting images, which are funny, silly, shocking, violent, rude, anything your mind will connect with, are going to allow you to do this. So as you go into, you get the summons, you can imagine yourself going into that lodge building, and you can imagine officers in the order you'll meet them. And look at their names, and they come up with a fun way to remember it. And you can do this when you meet someone. Now, some people have names that's really obvious, but always remember the image. Studies have shown that if you're introduced to someone, let's say this man's Mike, his name's Mike Baker, or you're introduced to someone and the introduction isn't about his name, this man's Mike, he is a baker, you will remember the second one more because you imagine him doing it. So change the name into something visual. If the person's name is Mr. Fisher, make a joke of it. He's sitting there at office, he's fishing when people are trying to do the ritual. If the man's name is Otto, make him an otter. And if you can tie it in, if you're meeting the person to a visual joke, you can do that. So if you meet a woman, her name's Michelle, imagine her nose is like a shell, something like that. Just don't always tell people how you do this. And you can add in more detail. That's how these memory images work. So if you get more information about them, the better. This will help your memory. So I think it's a great practice. Whenever you go to a lodge, use this. It'll keep you young, keep you fresh. You go through the list, memorize all the officers with memory images in each different position.
That's something I could put into practice right away.
Yeah.
Well, we already have a ready-made memory palace. Let's start using it for as much as possible.
That sounds good to me. We're going to wrap this up. Again, I'm Scott Schwartzberg from the Boynton Lodge Esoteric Research Group.
I'm Nicholas Harvey. And Martin, if people want to learn more, connect with you, buy your book, where's the best places to reach out with you?
Yes. If you want to buy the book, lewismasonic.co.uk, but you can find, if you Google a Mosaic Palace, you'll be able to find a distributor near you.
And social media, are you on there? Can I connect with you there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you can add me on Facebook and send me a message, or maybe send me a tweet on Twitter.
On Twitter as well.
That'd be very good.
Awesome. Thanks for coming by today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Learned a lot.